Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, we started just a little while ago on a new series in Matthew. And some of these, and depending on what the passage is, some of these are going to be more focused on the text of the passage in Matthew, and others will be focusing on the text, but it'll also be more than turning into a particular topic that is related to the text. And tonight is one of those times. And we're going to start at verse 1, but Matthew chapter 2 and verse 1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. And when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And then in verse 11, when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which is spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they are not. And we'll stop right there for now. And tonight's message, so we are focusing on Herod and what he did to the children in that time when he was trying to kill Christ. And so, but I want to expand on that and focus more, in addition to what Herod did, also on the overall topic of Satan's war on children. Satan's war on children. Because there is a real war on children that Satan has raised. Satan hates children. Mm-hmm. Satan hates life. He hates vibrancy. He hates potential. He hates all of that. And he loves to destroy. The enemy has come to steal, kill, and destroy, and that includes children. And so let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word and for this passage of Scripture that shows us both a good thing happening at the same time, a bad thing happening. But thank you that your plan was accomplished regarding Christ, and that nothing was going to thwart that. And I pray that you'd speak to us through your word tonight for your honor and glory. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. Satan's war on children. You know, anything that is good and innocent and wholesome, Satan hates it, and he looks to corrupt it. That's what his agenda is. And so when you think about a young child, just a new life being born, there's something different about a new life, a young child, or children of any age. Even the contrast when you go to college, when the college where Elizabeth and I met, you didn't see, unless you were working in a children's class in the church that they had there, unless you worked in the nursery or something. Generally, in the college life on that campus, you didn't see young children running around. It was college age, and then the adults, the staff, the faculty. And I do remember I think it was maybe during college days when there were guests coming in from other places, to tour the campus, and I remember seeing a couple times younger children. And it was a very stark contrast, like, wow, that looks strange, seeing a young child here. So there is something different about having young children around. And I think it would be the same. Before COVID, I would take some of our children to the nursing home. And what do they like to see in the nursing home? They like to see, it's a novelty in a nursing home to see young children, and there's something special about that that the residents love to see. And so there's something special about children, and there's a special focus that the world has on children, for good or for bad. But there's the rightful focus on trying to protect children, trying to help children, and of course, there's a lot of focus on, not wanting to see children go hungry. And, a couple years ago, they did that tax credit where they were sending out money every month, I think, for a while. And so it was kind of an advance on the expanded child tax credit. Why? So that children wouldn't go hungry. They wanted the parents to be able to afford food and all those things. So they said, wow, this was responsible for helping so many children not go hungry that particular year is what was said. But the point is, there's a focus on children, and there's a focus on children regarding education. I think one of the things that's exciting about children is that there's the opportunity to teach them. There's the opportunity to see them grow up, and you wonder what's going to happen with their lives. And so there's something exciting about that, of a lot of unknowns. And then as parents who have the children, or maybe adults who have a hand in other children's lives and some influence, it's the exciting opportunity to make an impact and make a difference in the life of a child. Because generally, children are going to be they're usually more innocent, more trusting, more there's different characteristics. And then people get older, and then the attitude is, well, we get stuck in our ways, Now, I'll be honest with you, I am not a proponent of that mentality that a person has to be stuck in their ways once they get to a certain age. Now, it is more likely that they're stuck in their ways, but I don't think that is a necessity. I think always, as Christians, we should remain flexible and pliable to be molded the way God wants to mold us, and not to have an attitude of being just, well, you know what, I'm 50 years old, this is the way I've been all my life, I'm not changing now, Well, that's not a biblical way of thinking. But at the same time, so children are impressionable. Children can be molded. Children can be impressed. And that is part of Satan's war on children, is he is waging war against them to try to corrupt them, to try to do things that will ruin their lives, harm them, and keep them from fulfilling God's will and potential for their lives. And so that's what I want to focus on tonight. Now, that takes different forms. That can take different forms. Some of it is the corruption of living children. And then in some of the cases we're going to see tonight, it's the actual death of children. And so we see that here in Matthew chapter 2. Look back at verses 7 and 8 again. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. And he was lying. He was a power-mad king. So the first part of Satan's war on children that we see in this passage was a power-mad king. Herod looked at Jesus as a threat because he was called, well, where's the king of the Jews? And he's thinking, well, there's nobody king of the Jews except me. I'm the one in charge. And so if there's this king of the Jews that's born, he's just been born, I have a chance to take him out. So he was power mad and power hungry, and that was part of the tragedy here toward the end of the chapter, when God warned the wise men, you need to not go back to Herod, don't tell him where Jesus is. And so Herod was angry. Verse 16, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Now this was a fulfillment of prophecy, as seen. We'll come back to that in a little bit, I believe. But what a tragedy that this happened. But power mad people do very desperate things, power hungry. And so Herod was a tool in Satan's hand to bring destruction and death and suffering upon children. Now God knew it was going to happen, and God still worked good out of it. But a power-mad king was part of Satan's war on children. We also go back to Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1, and we see a cowardly Pharaoh was also part of Satan's war on children. Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1. And verse 8. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 8. Actually, let's start reading verse 7, helps us with the context here. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 7. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. So they multiplied, they kept on increasing in their numbers. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. See, the previous one that knew Joseph, knew about him, and there was a good rapport there. There was a good standing there with the Jews, with the Israelites. But this new king rose up, and he didn't regard the significance of what Joseph had done and the significance of Joseph's people, and he didn't have respect for them. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. And so there was this affliction, there was this slavery, the oppression of the Israelites. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt. Now here's where the cowardly part comes in. Number one, he's kind of power hungry, just like Herod, but not so much just him personally. He was looking out for his nation, thinking we don't want to be overthrown by this other nation. But here's where he gets into this cowardly part. And so the king of Egypt, verse 15, spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. Now that's a cowardly way out, to have the midwives doing your bidding of killing these babies that are being born. I mean, what kind of twisted mind does somebody need to have to just the gall, the audacity, to then go to the midwives and say, yeah, you just need to kill the sons. But notice this in verse 17, but the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Now this is one of those examples, good example, where here's an authority, a king, telling them to do something where it was more honoring to God for them to disobey the king than it was to obey the king, because he was giving them a direct order that was opposed to what God would want. And it was opposed to life, it was for death. And so then in verse 18, the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, Why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. And so they kind of make up, they have this reason here of just saying, look, they just go into labor so fast, the delivery so fast. I mean, it's just not like the Egyptians. I mean, what could we do? We couldn't really kill them. And notice that in verse 20, therefore God dealt well with the midwives. And so because they took a stand and delivered the men children, they saved the men children alive, then God was pleased and he blessed the midwives. And the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh, notice this, Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. And so once again, a horrible, tragic occasion of the destruction of children. In this case, it was the sons, it was the men children. But regardless, all of these things, you see the same pattern of leaders who are not God-fearing, who are advocating, and then here in this case, pushing for, commanding the destruction of children, the death of children. There's another example of Satan's war on children that we see throughout history, and this one is the heathen nations. The heathen nations. Turn to Leviticus chapter 18. Leviticus chapter 18. And verse 21. Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 21, and thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Moloch, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. And turn to Leviticus chapter 20. Leviticus chapter 20, just a page or two over, verse 1. Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Moloch, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones, and I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Moloch, to defile my sanctuary, and to profane my holy name. Now this command was given, so we see that, that there was a reason why that the people, why God was giving the land to the nation of Israel, and part of that reason was of the heathen nations that were practicing these atrocities. Now, number one, they were idolaters, so they didn't worship the true God, but they also then committed these atrocities with the children and offering them to their false gods. And Molech was, God wanted the Israelites to have nothing to do with it. The heathen nations of the land were doing it. He said, don't be as the heathen. Now, Molech was a fire god, also thought to be the same as Baal, or Baal. Molech was for god of the Ammonites, and Baal was the god of the Phoenicians. Now, differing opinions exist. If you were to do a research on this about passing children through the fire, there are some differing opinions out there as to whether children were actually killed or if they were just made to take part in a traumatic ritual of consecration to their god. But considering how seriously God viewed the practice, that the killing of children was surely part of it. And Jeremiah 19:5 and 6 says, they have built also the high places of Baal to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came into my mind. I like that. Which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. Like that's not even on my radar. Has nothing to do with worship of me. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, this place shall no more be called Tophet, nor the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. And it was an abominable practice that even defiled the house of the Lord. If you're to read Jeremiah chapter 7, let's go over to Jeremiah chapter 7, work our way back through that direction. Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 30. Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 30. Let's read verse 29. Cut off thine hair, O Jerusalem, and cast it away, and take up a lamentation on high places. For the Lord hath rejected and forsaken the generation of his wrath. For the children of Judah have done evil in my sight, saith the Lord. They have set their abominations in the house which is called by my name, to pollute it. And they have built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my heart. So they're saying pretty much the same thing in a little different way. But this was an abomination. It was because it was being connected with worship. And he's saying, this has nothing to do with me. This has nothing to do with worshiping me. I don't want you to have anything to do with it. And God dealt with it very severely. Now Micah chapter 6, turn over there, contains a rhetorical question that gives some insight into a possible motive for the sacrificing of children. Just maybe a part of it, perhaps not the entire thing. But Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, those places, all those books of the Bible. Micah chapter 6 and verses 6 through 8. Wherewith shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with the thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So if there is a connection here, that would be a clue that somehow that sacrifice was made in appeasing the gods. And I don't think that's a stretch, because that is what they did in many different cultures throughout history. They would sacrifice their children or force their children into servitude in the temple for the appeasement of the gods. And if you're familiar with maybe Amy Carmichael and what she did in India, and that was part of what was happening, is the parents were being told, that you need to offer your children into the service of the temple because the gods are going to be mad at you if you don't do this. You need to give such a great offering and a great sacrifice. And so what it comes back to is the issue of the atonement. Do people have the ability, can a culture, can a nation have the ability to atone for its own sins and to appease the gods through its own actions and rituals? That was really at the heart of a lot of this, is doing something, having these lies set up in their minds that, yes, this is such a great sacrifice that will surely appease the gods. And notice, but think about it, all those the heathen pagan religions are religions of cruelty, not religions of grace and love and mercy, but cruelty. That was why there were so many cruel things done. Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? In verse 8, he hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God. Today's equivalent of child sacrifice is the practice of abortion. And you say, well, what gods are they worshiping? And that's been said by numerous people, that it's modern day equivalent of child sacrifice. Now, I don't generally make comments like that if there's not really a good connection or some way to back that up. But really, the fact is, it is true. The difference is, the practice of abortion is in the worship of self and the lusts of the flesh. That's really where the root of it is. And how do we know this? Because look at the attitudes of people who advocate for it the most. They like to say things like, my body, my choice. Nobody's going to, tell me what to do with my body. So it's all about me. It's all about my choice and my way I want to handle my body. So it's the altar of self. It's the altar of the lusts of the flesh. And so in that way, it is a sacrifice. They're sacrificing a child because they want things their way. It's all about them. Number 4, so the heathen nations have a part. Now, I didn't even get into this. I didn't even put this in my notes. But if you follow some of the news of what goes on around the world, there are African nations, especially in northern Africa, some of those places that there are children that get taken captive or even killed by these militants that will come into these schools, and they will take hundreds of children, dozens and hundreds of children. And there's times they get killed, there's times some of them get released, but the atrocities in heathen nations or by a people that are not followers of God. And so the number 4 fourth part of Satan's war on children is Corrupt and confused adults. Corrupt and confused adults. Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done abominable works, there is none that doeth good." So there's corruption, they are corrupt, they have done abominable works, there's none that doeth good. So every person, the Bible teaches both in Psalms and in Romans, there's a really kind of a repeat of this. Every person is naturally inclined to sin and to prioritize gratifying the flesh. That comes naturally. Add to that a powerful and well-organized agenda of indoctrinating others with corruption, then all that is needed for evil to come in like a flood is just the absence of biblical knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And this really stood out to me when you see the people that are marching in the parades, glorifying their lifestyles, or maybe supporting others who live perverse lifestyles. And when you see that there's nobody home there. They're just empty-minded, empty-headed. They're just completely void of any sort of wisdom and understanding. I mean, believe me, if you'd see some of the footage from these parades, you'd have to say the same thing. Because nobody in their right mind who's actually thinking clearly and properly with any semblance of common sense would even dare to dress themselves up in that way, to make their appearance in that way. They're just completely void of God's wisdom. So what does it take for the evil to come like a flood? Well, it's not simply a political movement. It's not, we need to revitalize conservatism or whatever the political movement might be, because many of those are also void of biblical wisdom. And so there's a reason why things keep going in the direction that they're going, because being conservative or having family values is different than being biblically minded. What's the bigger priority is being biblically minded, then you have the wisdom of God, and then you can properly confront the issues of the day. And so, but we face, so there's the battle with already the natural inclination to sin. But then there's also as I said, the agenda, the powerful and well-organized agenda of indoctrinating others with corruption. And it comes from the very highest levels. Now, during a drag queen march in New York City this weekend, some people, which weren't all even drag queens, were recorded chanting along with a drum beat. I mean, this is really chilling if you were to see this type of thing. Very chilling, the drum beats and the chants. I mean, this is like, it feels religious. It's religious fervor is what it is. And they're saying, we're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children. That's what they said. Now, part of me is thinking, now it's possible that some of them were saying that to mock those who accuse them of coming for the children. But the fact is, enough of them, there's enough people on record who have said literally they are coming for your children, that you can take them for their word when they say that, even if they're trying to say it in a mocking sense. And so that's the truth. And so their minds have been so twisted that they hate normalcy and decency. And so ultimately, they hate God, and then they hate anything that tries to draw the line between right and wrong. Now, here's the other thing. Putting aside the LGBT agenda, there is a huge problem with child abuse and neglect in the U.S. And according to the National Children's Alliance, more than 600,000 children are victims of abuse, if you include neglect in that, each year. And so their statistics say about 75% of them would be considered neglect, and then there's other types of abuse that go on. But that's a pretty high number of children either neglected or abused. And they consider neglect a form of abuse. So even putting aside an agenda to convert them to a certain lifestyle and an ideology, there's also terrible things being done to children in homes where they may not even have a position on the LGBT agenda. So it's not just that, it is just in everyday homes where there's family members abusing children, there's neglect, there's all kinds of things that are happening in the homes, and just terrible things. So corrupt and confused, what is that? What is that? Corrupt and confused adults. Corrupt and confused adults. So that is part of Satan's war on children. And by the way, I've seen, and boy, this is really what gets me when I witness this personally, is when I see adults teaching their children these philosophies of being gender neutral and being there. I've seen adults doing that personally. I've heard the testimonies of adults doing that, and of moms, and most of the time it's the moms, unfortunately, teaching their children, their young children, their young daughters, we don't assume somebody's gender. We don't assume somebody's gender. That is such a widespread practice. I've seen it enough where there's so much of that goes on. And so corrupt and confused adults. And what's the answer for that? Well, they need to get saved. They need to get right with God as the start of it. But and honestly, I don't know about you, but when I hear this stuff, I read this stuff, it kind of makes my head spin, because I'm thinking, how is this even possible? But we go back to what the Bible says about what the heart of man is, and we say, absolutely, it's not surprising. It's very much, because this type of thing has been going on. The war on children has been going on, and the corruption and wickedness has been going on for thousands and thousands of years to ancient civilizations. So the things we see today are nothing new. They just change in their form a little bit, but it's the same principles, the same root issues. And number 5, we see a wicked world system. A wicked world system. So the World Health Organization has developed comprehensive sex education guidelines. So this is at the top. The world system, the World Health Organization represents the height of the world system when it comes to health. And so here's just a small part of it. And I left out the things that would be especially inappropriate to say for children. But for 5-year-olds, 5 to 8-year-olds, so they have it broken down into all different sections. There's some issues where it covers a broad range. It's not just about these issues, but these are the ones that really stick out as being the most problematic. But I'm not even reading all of them. But for 5 to 8-year-olds regarding gender, the key idea that they have it broken down into a key idea and what the learners should be able to do. Key idea, it is important to understand the difference between biological sex and gender. That's what, to 5 to 8-year-olds, that's what the World Health Organization is saying. 5 to 8-year-olds. And that's what they're being taught is, you know what, the doctors just assume someone's gender at birth. They just assume. So they make a guess. They just guess at it, and then they assume that it's this, but really they just make a guess. So we don't want to assume someone's gender because they're just guessing when they're born, even if they're this biological sex. So it started with that biological sex and gender are not the same things, and then it went to, well, doctors are just guessing now, So that's what they put on the birth certificate, because they're just guessing, but they don't know for sure. 5 to 8-year-olds. Can you imagine teaching the 5 to 8-year-olds? I can imagine teaching anybody that, but I mean, it's ridiculous on its head. But 5 to 8-year-olds, why is that so important to teach a 5 to 8-year-old? Because they know they're the most impressionable and they have to get it in their minds at that time. Gone are the days of an innocent childhood where children can just be children. I shouldn't say gone are the days, but in a society as a whole, it's still possible, but on an individual level. But as a society as a whole, gone are the days where there's certain things that are just not taught to children because they're considered, you need to grow up, mature a little bit, and then certain things will be taught to you. Learners will be able to define gender and biological sex and describe how they are different, and then reflect on how they feel about their biological sex and gender. For 9 to 12-year-olds on this, the key idea is the way that individuals think of themselves or describe themselves to others in terms of their gender is unique to them and should be respected. Learners will be able to define gender identity. Now this is just 9 to 12. Define gender identity, explain how someone's gender identity may not match their biological sex, and acknowledge that everyone has a gender identity, appreciate their own gender identity, and demonstrate respect for the gender identity of others. For 5-year-olds, and I'll try to be careful with it, I try to be careful about not including things that would be inappropriate in this setting, but for 5 to 8-year-olds regarding sexual and reproductive anatomy and physiology, 5 to 8-year-olds, it is important, the key idea is it important to know the names and functions of one's body, and it is natural to be curious about them, including particular organs. And so, now let me tell you what, this is what my wife and I do. I'll just give you this little hint here. Here's what we tell our children. There are certain parts of your body you don't touch unless you're using the bathroom or unless you're cleaning. Everything else we'll teach you when you get a little older. That's what we teach them. That's what we teach them. At a younger, from five in the 5 to 8 range, definitely. And younger than 5. That's what we teach them. We say, because there are times you have to address certain things because children are naturally curious, but we just give that very simple instruction. There are certain particular parts of your body that you don't touch except for these purposes, but you'll learn more as you get older. That's it. And then if they have a particular question, we'll try to answer age appropriately. But what the line is, what the standard is of age appropriate, let me tell you, the world's idea of what's age appropriate has really changed a bit. A whole lot different than what my idea of age appropriate is. 5 to 8-year-olds, and I'm not even going to read all of it, identify the critical parts and describe their basic function for 5 to 8-year-olds. Recognize that being curious about one's body, including those parts, is completely normal. Practice, this one didn't make sense to me, practice asking and responding to questions about body parts that they are curious about. It's like, why do you need to practice? I mean, what's the point of practicing? It's just, if it comes up, you address it in whatever the proper way is. Now, why did I read all that? Because, I mean, there was more to it in that whole document. It's a pretty long document and pretty structured and organized and all this. Why do I say that? Because part of Satan's war on children is at the very highest levels of the world system. So if the World Health Organization has this as their guidelines, you know full well that's what makes its way down, that is the same at every level of the system. Whether it's the state level, the federal level, other countries, this is the World Health Organization. That's why that's significant. And so that in that way, it's pretty dire for the future of the children when they are being taught. So like I said, that's not even the extent of it. But I just wanted to show that at the very youngest ages, they are pushing this. And then there was a different video that had surfaced from another country. It's in another language, but there's subtitles at the bottom the World Health Organization produced that's just, I mean, it's off the wall terrible as far as a conversation between an adult and a child. And I mean, just horrendous. So those are 5 ways which Satan is waging war on children. So we see some from history with the power-mad king, with the cowardly Pharaoh. We see the heathen nations both in history and today, the corrupt and confused adults in the wicked world system. But what about winning the war Satan is waging against the children? Well, first of all, we need to have a determined defense. Go back to Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2. And verses 13 through 18, Matthew chapter 2, 13 through 18. When they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth, and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they are not. And so there was a defense. There was simply the first thing, and when threatened by Herod, God knew, of course, what was going to happen. So he said, hey, you need to get to Egypt. And so it was a place of safety for the child, so that he would not be caught up in that slaughter. And so that's the very first part of winning the war Satan is waging against the children, is having a determined defense. In other words, shielding them. In this case, it was shielding them from something that was threatening Jesus' life, but also we need to be shielding the children from things that threaten their innocence. Things that threaten their innocence. Now, in this world in which we live, it's very likely that children are going to just have to be aware of a little more of what's going on than maybe what they used to. But it's still important to be very, very careful and very, very deliberate about protecting their innocence. In other words, one way to shield them, protect them is, don't take them to drag queen story time at the library or the church house. There was a Presbyterian church in San Francisco that had a drag queen Bible time. And by the way, drag queens are a way for this is my definition of a drag queen. I developed this in my own head, by the way. I didn't get this from anywhere. I kind of like it, to be honest with you. Drag queens are a way for perverts to pass themselves off as artistic. So in other words, they're artistic perverts. That's what they are. So you can use that. Like I said, I didn't hear that. That's original with me. I'm going to put my stamp on it. It doesn't matter. But that's really what it is, because it's passed off as this is just art, this is beautiful, this is just people expressing themselves. And throughout all of history, there's been a lot of perversion and wickedness and fornication and adultery and all of those things that have been done under the guise of art. I mean, even today, there's photographs that are taken that normally would be considered pornographic, but hey, it's just art. Or, whatever it may be. There's all kinds of things. Oh, it's just art. It's just art. Well, art or not, sin is still sin. Uncleanness is still uncleanness. And that's really what it is. It's a way for perverted people to pass themselves off as artistic. Perverted men to pass themselves off as artistic. Now, verse 18 indicates that this was a fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, which is found in Jeremiah 31:15. You don't have to turn there. Actually, you know what? I wasn't going to turn there just for that specific verse, but there's the passage I want to look at. So let's go to Jeremiah 31, because even in the midst of the tragedy, God was doing something special. So back to Jeremiah chapter 31. Jeremiah chapter 31. And verse 1, At the same time saith the Lord, Will I be the God of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. Thus saith the Lord, The people which were left of the sword found grace in the wilderness, even Israel, when I went to cause him to rest. The Lord hath appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore with loving kindness have I drawn thee. Again I will build thee, and thou shalt be built, O Virgin of Israel. Thou shalt again be adorned with thy tabrets, and shalt go forth in the dances of them that make merry. Thou shalt yet plant vines upon the mountains of Samaria. The planter shall plant and shall eat them as common things. For there shall be a day that the watchman upon the Mount Ephraim shall cry, Arise ye, and let us go up to Zion, unto the Lord our God. For thus saith the Lord, Sing with gladness for Jacob, and shout among the chief of the nations. Publish ye, praise ye, and say, O Lord, save thy people, the remnant of Israel. Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the coasts of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and her that travaileth with child together. A great company shall return thither. They shall come with weeping, and with supplications will I lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of waters in a straight way, wherein they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattereth Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. For the Lord hath redeemed Jacob, and ransomed him from the hand of him that was stronger than he. Therefore they shall come and sing in the height of Zion, and shall flow together to the goodness of the Lord, for wheat, and for wine, and for oil, and for the young of the flock and of the herd. And their soul shall be as a watered garden, and they shall not sorrow any more at all. Then shall the virgin rejoice in the dance, both young men and old together. For I will turn their mourning into joy, and will comfort them, and make them rejoice from their sorrow. And I will satiate the soul of the priests with fatness, and my people shall be satisfied with my goodness, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refused to be comforted for her children because they were not. Thus saith the Lord, refrain thy voice from weeping, and thine eyes from tears, for thy work shall be rewarded, saith the Lord, and they shall come again from the land of the enemy. And there is hope in thine end, saith the Lord, that thy children shall come again to their own border. And that is that's just been repeated throughout Israel's history of times of great despair and hopelessness, yet God continually redeemed them. And the culmination of that will be in the last days, when God restores them to Israel, restores His people, to the Jewish people to Israel, to that land, and then there'll be a time of there'll be a time of great trouble, a time of Jacob's trouble, which is the worst that has been seen. But then God is still going to redeem, and Christ will then rule and reign as King. And so part of this weeping, this lamentation, it was in the midst, the process of something special that God was doing, that even in the midst of that tragedy with those children being killed, God was bringing about He was the King of the Jews, He is the King of the Jews, and so God was preserving Christ in the process of that and working out something special. And so even in the midst of the tragedy, and let me just tell you, even in the midst of the tragedy of what is happening with so many children today, God is still doing special things and can still do special things in the lives of children today. It's not all hopeless. It's not all hope is lost. It's a time to stand. It's a time to engage in that war. Because the fact is, we need to have a warfare mentality for our children, for the hearts of our children, for the lives of our children. And we need to also stand for other children as well. Now, the term sheltered children has been used in a negative way for many years. Oh yeah, those children, they're really sheltered. But, and I realize there are some that are just more reclusive, and they just don't know how to, they were so secluded that they just don't know how to interact with people and really hurt their development. But considering how things are today, is it really a bad thing for children to be sheltered? Is it really a bad thing for children to be sheltered? Is it really a bad thing for children to be kept from just so many of the things that are going on in this world, to be kept from the ideologies, the philosophies that children are being bombarded with and pummeled with? Our children aren't watching the cartoons on TV. We're not watching the Disney cartoons. You know what they're doing? They're inserting the ideology into the cartoons. They're inserting, we didn't have them watching them before that anyway. But they don't need to have an obsession with some character, a fictional character that's going to have an ideology, or they don't need to have an obsession with a fictional character anyway. But there are just certain things where they're not hurt if they don't have those things. Because if in the absence of those things, then you can fill their lives with better things, even better things. The thing is, in a good time and in a gradual way, they will learn how this world is anyway. They'll have to be taught it. They'll have to learn it. But it's a good thing to shield the children from the darts of the enemy and the ideology of the wicked. And then number 2, finally, a good offense is the best defense. A good offense is the best defense. First of all, they need to be taught the existence and the fear of God. Let's turn over to one more passage, Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, judgment, and to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb in the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. Notice verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So the first thing that children need to be taught, the good offense is the best defense, is they need to be taught the existence and the fear of God. That's where it all starts. The existence of God and the fear of God. They need to be brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So they need to be taught that there is a God. They need to be taught to fear God, to have a reverence for Him, but then bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And Ephesians, you don't have to turn here, but Ephesians chapter 6 verse 4 says, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Now the word nurture means tutorage, education, training, and chastening. So that's what nurture is. It's bringing them up, it's instructing them, it's educating them. You know, and there are too many parents who are passive parents in letting the world educate their children. Whether it's the television, whether it's the movies, whether it's the, you know, a godless school system or whatever it is, they kind of just have this attitude, well, it's not really my job to teach my children. But biblically speaking, now it makes sense if the world thinks that way, but it's really terrible when Christians think that way, when they have that same attitude and they have a passive approach to teaching their children. Now the Kellogg's, you've reached the end of the journey, right? of educating your children, at least the formal education in school. You know, but they spent years and years, and there are others, you know, Denise, she invested in her children, and we've got, I don't want to leave anybody out, but we have numerous, we have families represented here that have invested and are investing in their children and taking ownership of that. And that's what God's will is. That's what His plan is. And tutorage, education, training, and chastening. And then admonition is calling attention to or rebuke or warning. So there is the, if you want to call it the negative aspect, it's not really negative because it's a positive thing for their lives, but there's the bringing them up, teaching them the right things, but there's also a necessity to bring attention to and rebuke or warn them about the wrong things. This verse was especially written to fathers, and there are certain things that only parents can do to the fullest extent. So if you have an influence in somebody else's children, we got to influence them the best that we can, but really ultimately it starts in the home with the parents, and parents need to take ownership of that. And then along with that is teaching them diligently. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 through 7, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, strength. And then it says, and the word that God was going to be giving them, the law of God that He was given to Moses, that He was to pass on to the children of Israel, they were to keep it in their heart. And then it said, Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. Diligently unto thy children. And so, yeah, it's quite a job. It's quite a job. Because, you know, diligence means a steady application. It means you have to keep at it. It means you have to keep at it. And by the way, if you have adult children that are out of the house and stuff, if you've still got a relationship with them, you can still invest in them, and you can still have a part in their life. You may not have, there may not be as young as they once were at the most impressionable ages, but you can still invest in their lives. So we need to be diligent about this, because let me tell you, the world is very, very serious and diligent about what they're doing. They're very much, And what the advantage they have is the whole framework of the world system is set up to be an advantage to their kind of ideology. We don't have that advantage. So it means, yes, it is extra work, it is extra effort, but it's worth it. Worth having the good offense and waging warfare to defend our children and to arm them with what they need, to equip them with what they need. The battle isn't getting easier, it's only getting more intense. But in spite of tragedy, good things can happen. Good things can happen. And good things are still happening. God is still working in families and children's lives and individual households. And no matter what the rest of the world's going to do, they're going to do what they're going to do. We can do our part in our families, our homes, our churches, and then we can also try to make a difference out there as well. But good things can still happen and do still happen. Let's commit ourselves tonight to being able to fight back, to defend and have a hand in pushing back against Satan's war on children.